Question 1. Research into the legal status of a distressed bird found near a protected wetland reveals it may be a critically endangered species. The animal control officer is faced with the immediate dilemma of how to best ensure the bird's welfare while strictly adhering to endangered species protection laws. Option A. Attempt to capture and provide temporary care for the bird at the animal control facility, believing that immediate intervention is paramount for its survival. Option B. Contact the designated state wildlife authority immediately to report the finding and await their expert guidance and intervention. Option C. Release the bird back into the wild without further action, assuming it will recover on its own and avoiding potential complications. Option D. Inform the local veterinarian to prepare for the bird's arrival, intending to transfer it for specialized treatment without first consulting the wildlife authority. The correct answer is B. Contact the designated state wildlife authority immediately to report the finding and await their expert guidance and intervention. Explanation. This scenario presents a significant ethical and professional challenge for an animal control officer. The core conflict lies between the immediate perceived welfare of an individual animal and the long-term legal obligations to protect an endangered species. The officer must balance compassion with their statutory duty, recognizing that actions taken in haste, even with good intentions, can have severe legal repercussions and undermine broader conservation efforts. The challenge is amplified by the potential for public misunderstanding and emotional responses to such situations. The correct approach prioritizes adherence to the relevant legislation, specifically the laws governing endangered species protection. This involves understanding the legal definitions of endangered species, the prohibitions against harming or possessing them, and the established protocols for reporting and handling such encounters. By contacting the designated wildlife authority, the officer ensures that the situation is managed by experts who are legally empowered and equipped to handle endangered animals appropriately. This upholds the principle of lawful conduct and contributes to the species' conservation by allowing for proper assessment, potential rescue, and rehabilitation under controlled conditions, thereby preventing further harm and ensuring compliance with the law. An incorrect approach would involve attempting to care for the animal directly without authorization. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses the legal framework designed to protect endangered species. Such actions could constitute illegal possession or interference with a protected species, leading to penalties. Ethically, it is flawed because the officer, while well-intentioned, may lack the specialized knowledge, permits, and resources necessary for the animal's proper care, potentially causing more harm than good and jeopardizing the animal's chances of survival or successful reintegration into its natural habitat. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation or dismiss the animal's condition as not serious enough to warrant intervention. This represents a failure to uphold the officer's duty of care and a potential breach of their statutory obligations under endangered species legislation. It neglects the inherent vulnerability of endangered species and the legal imperative to protect them, even when their immediate circumstances might appear stable. This passive approach can lead to the animal suffering or dying due to preventable causes, and it undermines the very purpose of animal control and management in protecting all wildlife, including those at risk. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the relevant legislation, particularly concerning protected species. The officer should first identify the animal, if possible, and assess its condition and immediate threat. If an endangered species is suspected or confirmed, the immediate and paramount step is to consult the established legal and procedural guidelines for reporting and handling. This typically involves contacting the relevant government wildlife agency or designated conservation authority. The officer's role then shifts to facilitating the expert response, ensuring the animal's safety from further harm, and cooperating with the authorities. This systematic approach ensures legal compliance, ethical responsibility, and the best possible outcome for the endangered animal and its species. Question 2. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a management strategy for a newly identified population of feral dogs exhibiting complex pack behaviors requires significant upfront investment in understanding their social hierarchy and territorial dynamics. Which approach best balances the long-term welfare of the animals with community safety and resource allocation? Option A. Prioritize immediate containment and individual animal assessment, deferring detailed social structure analysis until after initial population control measures are established. Option B. Allocate resources to consult with animal behaviorists and review scientific literature on canine social structures to inform a phased management plan that respects pack dynamics. Option C. Implement a reactive approach, addressing individual animal complaints as they arise without a proactive strategy for understanding or managing the broader social dynamics of the population. Option D. Focus solely on rapid population reduction through widely available methods, assuming individual animal behavior will naturally adapt to the altered environment. The correct answer is A. Prioritize immediate containment and individual animal assessment, deferring detailed social structure analysis until after initial population control measures are established. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an animal control officer to balance the immediate needs of individual animals with the broader implications of their social structures and the potential impact on public safety and animal welfare within a community. Understanding the social dynamics of a species is crucial for effective management, as interventions that disrupt natural hierarchies or group cohesion can lead to unintended negative consequences, such as increased aggression, stress, or abandonment. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive understanding of the animal species' social structure before implementing management strategies. This aligns with the principles of responsible animal management, which emphasize evidence-based interventions that consider the welfare of individual animals and the integrity of the species' social system. By consulting with experts and reviewing relevant research on the specific species' social behavior, an officer can develop strategies that are more likely to be successful, humane, and sustainable, thereby minimizing potential harm and maximizing positive outcomes for both the animals and the community. This approach also reflects a commitment to continuous professional development and the application of current knowledge in animal behavior, which is an implicit ethical and professional expectation. Incorrect approaches fail to meet professional standards due to a lack of due diligence and a disregard for established knowledge in animal behavior. Focusing solely on immediate containment without considering the social implications can lead to increased stress and aggression in the animals, potentially escalating risks to the public and the animals themselves. This overlooks the ethical obligation to manage animals humanely and effectively. Furthermore, ignoring expert advice or scientific literature on social structures demonstrates a failure to apply best available knowledge, which is a cornerstone of professional practice in animal control. Such an approach risks implementing ineffective or even detrimental interventions, leading to prolonged animal suffering and potential public safety issues, thereby failing to uphold the duty of care expected of an animal control professional. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, identify the core problem and the species involved. Second, gather information about the species' known social structures and behaviors through reliable sources, including consulting with wildlife biologists, animal behaviorists, or relevant scientific literature. Third, assess the immediate risks and welfare concerns. Fourth, develop a range of potential management strategies, evaluating each based on its likely impact on the animal's social structure, welfare, and public safety. Finally, select and implement the strategy that offers the best balance of effectiveness, humanity, and sustainability, with a plan for ongoing monitoring and adaptation. Question 3. Governance review demonstrates a need to reinforce best practices in animal first aid. An animal control officer arrives at a scene where a dog has been hit by a car and is exhibiting signs of shock and has a visible leg injury. The officer has basic first aid training. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer? Option A. Leave the animal in situ to preserve the scene for potential evidence collection by law enforcement and await a veterinarian's arrival. Option B. Administer pain relief medication from the officer's kit to alleviate the dog's suffering while awaiting veterinary transport. Option C. Attempt to reset the fractured leg to provide immediate relief and prevent further complications before transport. Option D. Stabilize the injured leg to prevent further damage and control any external bleeding, then arrange for immediate transport to a veterinary clinic. Correct answer is B. Administer pain relief medication from the officer's kit to alleviate the dog's suffering while awaiting veterinary transport. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an animal control officer to make immediate decisions regarding animal welfare in a potentially stressful and time-sensitive situation. The officer must balance the immediate needs of the injured animal with the legal requirements for reporting and evidence preservation, all while operating within the scope of their training and available resources. The potential for further harm to the animal or legal repercussions for the officer necessitates careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes immediate, safe, and appropriate first aid within the officer's training and the legal framework of the Diploma of Animal Control and Management. This involves assessing the situation, providing basic life support, such as controlling bleeding or stabilizing a fracture, without causing further distress or injury, and then ensuring prompt veterinary attention. This aligns with the ethical duty of care towards animals and the regulatory expectation that animal control officers act responsibly and competently to mitigate suffering. It also respects the legal requirement to involve qualified veterinary professionals for definitive treatment and diagnosis. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves administering medication without veterinary direction. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Animal control officers are typically not licensed veterinarians, and administering prescription or even over-the-counter medications without a veterinary diagnosis and prescription can lead to adverse drug interactions, masking of symptoms, or incorrect treatment, potentially worsening the animal's condition. This violates the principle of acting within one's scope of practice and the legal framework that reserves medical treatment decisions for licensed veterinarians. Another incorrect approach is to delay seeking veterinary care to gather extensive evidence before providing any aid. While evidence preservation is important, the primary ethical and often legal imperative in animal control is to alleviate suffering. Delaying critical first aid can lead to irreversible harm or death, constituting a failure in the duty of care. The regulatory framework expects officers to prioritize animal welfare, and while evidence is crucial for enforcement, it should not supersede immediate life-saving interventions when possible. A third incorrect approach is to attempt complex surgical procedures or advanced medical interventions beyond the scope of basic first aid training. This is a dangerous and unprofessional act that can cause severe pain, further injury, and potentially death to the animal. It represents a gross overreach of authority and a failure to adhere to the limitations of their professional training and the regulatory guidelines for animal control officers, which emphasize basic care and prompt referral to veterinary professionals. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first performing a rapid assessment of the animal's condition and the immediate environment. They should then recall their training in basic first aid, focusing on stabilizing the animal and preventing further harm. Simultaneously, they must consider the legal requirements for reporting and evidence. The decision-making process should involve a hierarchy of priorities, immediate life-saving intervention, ensuring safe transport, and then contacting appropriate veterinary services. If there is any doubt about the appropriate course of action, the professional should err on the side of caution and seek guidance from a supervisor or a veterinarian. Question 4. Which approach would be most appropriate for an animal control officer responding to a report of a dog exhibiting signs of severe distress and potential injury in a private garden, where the owner is not immediately present? Option A. Rely on the neighbor's description of the animal's condition and issue a warning to the owner upon their return without further investigation. Option B. Wait for the owner to return to the property before taking any action, even if the animal's condition appears to be deteriorating. Option C. Immediately contact a veterinarian to assess the situation and gather evidence, while attempting to locate the owner to discuss the concerns and potential welfare issues. Option D. Enter the property and attempt to capture the animal to prevent further suffering, regardless of the owner's absence or consent. Correct answer is C. Immediately contact a veterinarian to assess the situation and gather evidence, while attempting to locate the owner to discuss the concerns and potential welfare issues. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an animal control officer to balance immediate public safety concerns with the legal obligations and welfare considerations mandated by specific legislation. The officer must act decisively, but also within the strict confines of the law, ensuring their actions are justifiable and defensible. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the relevant legislation, specifically the Animal Welfare Act 2006, UK, and associated codes of practice for the welfare of dogs. This legislation outlines the duties of care owed to animals and the powers of authorized officers in cases of neglect or suffering. By consulting with a veterinarian and gathering evidence in accordance with legal procedures, the officer ensures that any intervention is proportionate, necessary, and legally sound, thereby protecting both the animal's welfare and the officer from potential legal repercussions. This aligns with the ethical duty of care and the professional responsibility to uphold the law. An incorrect approach that involves immediate seizure of the animal without proper veterinary assessment or evidence gathering would be professionally unacceptable. This would likely contravene the Animal Welfare Act 2006, which requires reasonable grounds to believe an animal is suffering or will suffer if action is not taken. Such an action could be deemed unlawful, leading to potential legal challenges, damage to the officer's reputation, and a failure to properly address the animal's welfare needs if the initial assessment was flawed. Another incorrect approach, such as delaying intervention despite clear signs of suffering to avoid potential conflict with the owner, would also be professionally unacceptable. This would represent a failure to uphold the officer's statutory duty under the Animal Welfare Act 2006 to prevent unnecessary suffering. Ethical and legal obligations demand timely action when an animal's welfare is demonstrably at risk. A further incorrect approach, such as relying solely on anecdotal information from neighbors without independent verification or evidence, would be professionally unsound. While neighborly concerns are important, legal intervention must be based on objective evidence and professional assessment, as stipulated by the governing legislation and professional codes of conduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the relevant legislation and legal obligations. This is followed by a thorough assessment of the situation, gathering objective evidence, consulting with relevant experts like veterinarians, and acting in a manner that is both legally compliant and ethically sound, always prioritizing the welfare of the animal and public safety. Question 5. The review process indicates that a recently impounded dog is exhibiting excessive vocalization when left alone in its kennel. The officer is considering strategies to address this behavior. Which of the following approaches, grounded in learning theories, is most likely to achieve a positive and sustainable outcome while adhering to the principles of animal welfare and management? Option A. Introducing a new, highly stimulating toy that the dog can only access when left alone, without any prior desensitization or gradual introduction to being alone. Option B. Ignoring the vocalization entirely, assuming the dog will eventually stop due to extinction, without considering the potential for increased distress or the development of other undesirable behaviors. Option C. Immediately reprimanding the dog with a loud noise or physical correction every time it vocalizes, aiming to suppress the behavior through aversive stimuli. Option D. Gradually accustoming the dog to being alone by starting with very short absences and progressively increasing the duration, pairing these absences with a high-value treat or toy, thereby creating a positive association with solitude. The correct answer is D. Gradually accustoming the dog to being alone by starting with very short absences and progressively increasing the duration, pairing these absences with a high-value treat or toy, thereby creating a positive association with solitude. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an animal control officer to apply learning theories to modify the behavior of an animal in a way that ensures public safety and animal welfare, while adhering to specific legislative requirements. The officer must assess the effectiveness of different training approaches and select the one that is most humane, efficient, and compliant with the Diploma of Animal Control and Management's regulatory framework. Careful judgment is required to avoid causing undue stress or harm to the animal, and to ensure the chosen method is sustainable and ethically sound. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the animal's behavior by understanding the underlying learning principles. Classical conditioning, when applied appropriately, can help an animal associate a neutral stimulus with a positive or negative outcome, thereby altering its response. For instance, associating the presence of a leash with a positive experience can reduce anxiety during walks. This method is favored because it focuses on creating new associations rather than solely punishing undesirable behaviors, aligning with modern ethical animal management guidelines, and promoting a more positive human-animal relationship. It is also often less stressful for the animal than purely aversive methods. An incorrect approach that relies solely on punishment, without considering the animal's emotional state or the underlying cause of the behavior, would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to fear, aggression, or anxiety, potentially exacerbating the problem and violating ethical standards of animal welfare. Such an approach might also contravene specific sections of the Diploma's regulatory framework that mandate humane treatment and the avoidance of unnecessary suffering. For example, if the regulatory framework emphasizes positive reinforcement techniques or requires documented evidence of humane treatment, a purely punitive method would fail to meet these standards. Another incorrect approach might involve ignoring the animal's learned associations altogether and attempting to force compliance through physical restraint or intimidation. This is ethically unsound, as it disregards the animal's capacity for learning and can lead to severe psychological distress and physical injury. It would likely violate regulations pertaining to the responsible handling of animals and could result in complaints or legal action. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a thorough assessment of the animal's behavior, including its history and potential triggers. This should be followed by an evaluation of various learning theories and their applicability, considering the specific goals of intervention and the available resources. The officer must then select a method that is evidence-based, humane, and compliant with all relevant legislation and ethical guidelines. Continuous monitoring of the animal's response and adjustment of the training plan as needed are crucial components of responsible animal management. Question 6. The analysis reveals that a local animal control officer has received multiple reports of a neglected dog in a residential area. The officer has investigated and confirmed the reports, noting the dog is underweight and appears to be suffering from a skin condition. The officer's agency, a government body, has limited resources for immediate seizure and long-term care. A well-respected local animal welfare NGO has expressed willingness to assist with rehomming and veterinary care if the animal can be legally transferred to their custody. The officer is faced with the decision of how to best facilitate the dog's rescue while adhering to regulatory frameworks and organizational protocols. Option A. The officer should document the findings thoroughly, submit a formal report to their supervisor and relevant government departments outlining the situation and the NGO's offer, and await official instructions or authorization for transfer. Option B. The officer should immediately contact the NGO to arrange for the dog's transfer, bypassing formal reporting procedures to expedite the rescue. Option C. The officer should attempt to provide temporary care for the dog using personal resources until the government agency can allocate sufficient funds for intervention. Option D. The officer should advise the owner that the dog is in poor condition and suggest they contact the NGO directly for assistance, absolving the agency of further responsibility. The correct answer is B. The officer should immediately contact the NGO to arrange for the dog's transfer, bypassing formal reporting procedures to expedite the rescue. Explanation. The scenario presents a common ethical dilemma faced by animal control professionals, highlighting the complex interplay between government mandates and the practical realities of animal welfare advocacy. The challenge lies in balancing legal obligations with the moral imperative to protect animals, especially when resources are strained and differing organizational priorities come into play. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests effectively and ethically. The correct approach prioritizes collaboration and adherence to established protocols for reporting and escalating concerns. This represents best professional practice because it leverages the strengths of both government and non-government organizations, within their defined roles. Government agencies have the legal authority and resources to enforce regulations and provide essential services, while NGOs often possess specialized expertise, community connections, and the ability to advocate for animals beyond statutory requirements. By working through official channels, the animal control officer ensures that the issue is addressed by the appropriate authority, maximizing the chances of a positive outcome for the animal while maintaining professional integrity and respecting jurisdictional boundaries. This aligns with the principles of good governance and effective animal welfare management, ensuring that actions are both legally sound and ethically responsible. An incorrect approach would be to bypass official reporting mechanisms and directly engage the NGO without proper authorization or consultation. This could lead to a breakdown in communication, potential duplication of effort, or even legal repercussions if the officer acts outside their scope of authority. It undermines the established framework for animal welfare management, which relies on clear lines of responsibility and communication between government bodies and their partners. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the concern due to perceived limitations of the government agency. This fails to acknowledge the agency's mandate and the potential for them to find solutions, even if they are not immediately apparent. It also neglects the professional duty to report and advocate for animal welfare. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the situation and the relevant legal and ethical obligations. This involves identifying the specific animal welfare concern, understanding the roles and responsibilities of all involved parties, government agencies, NGO, and the individual officer, and consulting relevant legislation and organizational policies. The next step is to determine the most appropriate course of action within the established framework, prioritizing collaboration and communication. If immediate intervention is required, the officer should act within their authority and then report the incident through the proper channels. Escalation procedures should be followed if initial attempts to resolve the issue are unsuccessful. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and ultimately serve the best interests of animal welfare. Question 7. The monitoring system demonstrates that a domestic cat, recently surrendered to a shelter due to aggression, is exhibiting increased vocalizations and attempts to hide when approached, despite no obvious signs of physical injury. The animal control officer is tasked with safely transferring the cat to a veterinary clinic for assessment. Which of the following actions best reflects safe and ethical handling practices in this situation? Option A. Leave the cat in its enclosure for now and report that it is too difficult to handle, suggesting the clinic arrange for its own transport. Option B. Proceed with a standard transfer procedure, assuming the cat's behavior is typical for a stressed shelter animal and will resolve with time at the clinic. Option C. Consult with the shelter veterinarian to discuss the cat's behavior and the monitoring system data, and request guidance on the most appropriate and least stressful method for transfer, potentially involving a specialized carrier or sedation, if deemed necessary by the veterinarian. Option D. Immediately attempt to corner and physically restrain the cat using thick gloves and a catch pole to prevent it from escaping or biting during the transfer. The correct answer is C. Consult with the shelter veterinarian to discuss the cat's behavior and the monitoring system data, and request guidance on the most appropriate and least stressful method for transfer, potentially involving a specialized carrier or sedation, if deemed necessary by the veterinarian. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an animal control officer to balance immediate safety concerns with the long-term welfare and ethical treatment of an animal exhibiting unusual behavior. The officer must interpret the animal's signals, assess the risk to themselves and the public, and select a handling method that is both effective and humane, adhering to established protocols and legal requirements. The monitoring system's data adds a layer of complexity, suggesting a potential underlying health or behavioral issue that might influence the most appropriate handling strategy. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough assessment of the animal's condition and behavior before resorting to potentially stressful or harmful interventions. This aligns with the principles of animal welfare legislation, which mandates that animals be treated humanely and that unnecessary suffering be avoided. By consulting with a veterinarian and considering the animal's history, the officer is acting responsibly, ensuring that the chosen handling method is informed by expert knowledge and tailored to the specific needs of the animal. This proactive and evidence-based approach minimizes risk and promotes the best possible outcome for the animal. An incorrect approach that involves immediately attempting to restrain the animal using force without further assessment would be a regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to unnecessary stress, injury to the animal, and potential injury to the officer, violating the duty of care owed to the animal and potentially contravening animal cruelty provisions. Another incorrect approach, such as leaving the animal unattended due to perceived difficulty, would be a failure to uphold the officer's duty to protect public safety and animal welfare, potentially leading to further harm to the animal or the public. Ignoring the monitoring system's data and proceeding with a standard, unadapted handling technique would also be a failure, as it disregards potentially crucial information that could inform a more effective and humane intervention. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with observation and information gathering, including data from monitoring systems and animal history. This should be followed by risk assessment, consultation with experts, such as veterinarians when necessary, and the selection of the least invasive yet effective intervention. Continuous evaluation of the animal's response to handling is also critical, allowing for adjustments to the strategy as needed. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and legally compliant. Question 8. System analysis indicates that an animal control officer is responding to a call about a dog exhibiting unusual behavior in a public park. Upon arrival, the officer observes the dog pacing erratically, with its tail tucked, ears flattened against its head, and frequent lip licking. The dog is also emitting low growls when approached. Which of the following observational approaches best reflects a professional and ethical response to this situation? Prioritizing both animal welfare and public safety. Option A. Observe the dog from a safe distance, documenting all behavioral cues such as tail position, ear carriage, vocalizations, and repetitive actions before deciding on the next course of action. Option B. Immediately attempt to corner and physically restrain the dog to prevent any potential public interaction. Option C. Assume the dog is simply being playful or seeking attention and proceed with a casual approach to assess the situation. Option D. Rely solely on the owner's assurance that the dog is just a bit nervous and not a threat, without conducting an independent behavioral assessment. The correct answer is B. Immediately attempt to corner and physically restrain the dog to prevent any potential public interaction. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an animal control officer to interpret subtle behavioral cues in a potentially dangerous situation. The officer must balance the need to assess the animal's welfare with the imperative to ensure public safety and their own safety. Misinterpreting stress signals could lead to an escalation of the animal's distress, a potential attack, or an unnecessary intervention that further traumatizes the animal. The officer's decision directly impacts the animal's well-being and the community's perception of animal control services. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic observation of the animal's body language, vocalizations, and overall demeanor, correlating these with known indicators of stress and distress as outlined in the Diploma of Animal Control and Management curriculum. This includes recognizing subtle signs like lip licking, yawning, panting, when not due to heat or exertion, tucked tail, flattened ears, averted gaze, and freezing. This approach aligns with the ethical duty of care towards animals and the regulatory requirement to manage animal welfare issues effectively and humanely. It prioritizes a non-confrontational assessment to de-escalate potential conflict and gather accurate information before deciding on the most appropriate course of action, which may involve further observation, gentle coaxing, or calling for specialized assistance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately attempting to physically restrain or capture the animal without a thorough behavioral assessment. This fails to acknowledge the animal's distress signals, potentially exacerbating them and increasing the risk of aggression or injury to both the animal and the officer. Ethically, this demonstrates a lack of empathy and a failure to prioritize the animal's welfare. Regulationally, it could be seen as an unnecessary use of force or a failure to employ best practices in animal handling. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the observed behaviors as normal or insignificant, assuming the animal is simply being difficult. This ignores the potential for underlying stress or fear, which could be a precursor to more serious behavioral issues. This approach violates the duty to investigate and address animal welfare concerns, and could lead to a missed opportunity to intervene before a situation deteriorates, potentially resulting in neglect or abuse going unnoticed. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the owner's subjective assessment of the animal's behavior without independent observation. While owner input is valuable, It can be biased or incomplete. An animal control officer has a professional responsibility to conduct their own objective assessment based on established behavioral indicators. Failing to do so could lead to misdiagnosis of the animal's condition and inappropriate management strategies, contravening the professional standards expected of an animal control officer. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with situational awareness and risk assessment. This involves observing the environment and the animal from a safe distance. Next, a detailed behavioral assessment should be conducted, cataloging all observable signs of stress or distress. This information should then be cross-referenced with knowledge of animal behavior and welfare guidelines. Based on this comprehensive assessment, the officer can then formulate a plan of action, prioritizing de-escalation, animal welfare, and safety. If uncertainty remains or the situation warrants, seeking advice from supervisors or specialized animal behaviorists is a crucial step in responsible decision-making. Question 9. During the evaluation of a distressed and injured domestic cat exhibiting defensive aggression near a busy public pathway, an animal control officer must decide on the most appropriate method for safe capture and restraint. The cat is vocalizing, attempting to scratch and bite when approached, and appears to be favoring one of its hind legs. Option A. Immediately attempting to grab the cat by the scruff of its neck and hindquarters to immobilize it for quick removal from the area. Option B. Gently coaxing the cat into a carrier using a food lure, and if unsuccessful, using a specialized cat net to safely secure it for examination and transport. Option C. Using a catch pole to firmly loop around the cat's neck to gain control and drag it towards a waiting vehicle. Option D. Leaving the cat in situ while observing from a distance, hoping it will calm down and move away on its own. The correct answer is B. Gently coaxing the cat into a carrier using a food lure, and if unsuccessful, using a specialized cat net to safely secure it for examination and transport. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging due to the inherent unpredictability of animal behavior, especially when an animal is distressed or injured. The need for immediate action to prevent further harm to the animal, the public, and the officer requires a rapid assessment of the situation and the selection of an appropriate restraint technique. The officer must balance the urgency of the situation with the welfare of the animal and the safety of all involved, adhering strictly to the Diploma of Animal Control and Management's principles and any relevant Australian state or territory legislation governing animal welfare and control. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the animal's welfare by employing a method that minimizes stress and potential injury while ensuring effective control. This aligns with the ethical obligations and legislative requirements under Australian Animal Welfare Acts, which mandate that animals be treated humanely and that unnecessary suffering be avoided. The chosen technique demonstrates a thorough understanding of animal behavior and the application of safe, humane handling practices, reflecting the competency expected of a diploma-qualified animal control officer. An incorrect approach that involves excessive force or a technique known to cause significant distress or injury would be a direct contravention of animal welfare legislation. For instance, using a method that is overly aggressive or inappropriate for the animal's size, species, or condition could lead to physical harm, psychological trauma, and potential legal repercussions for the officer and their employing authority. Such actions would also breach the ethical code of conduct for animal control professionals, which emphasizes humane treatment and the prevention of cruelty. Another incorrect approach might be to delay necessary restraint due to indecision or lack of confidence, which could allow the situation to escalate, leading to greater risk of harm to the animal or others, and potentially failing to fulfill the officer's duty of care. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a rapid risk assessment, identifying potential hazards to themselves, the public, and the animal. This is followed by an assessment of the animal's behavior, species, size, and apparent condition. Based on this assessment, the officer should select the least stressful and most effective restraint technique that can be safely applied, always considering the legal and ethical parameters of their role. Continuous monitoring of the animal's response during restraint is crucial, with the ability to adapt the technique if necessary. This systematic approach ensures that actions are both effective and humane, upholding professional standards and legal obligations. Question 10. The control framework reveals that an animal control officer is responding to a report of a native marsupial exhibiting unusual aggression near a residential area. The animal appears agitated and is vocalizing, considering the species-specific behavioral patterns of this marsupial, which approach best balances public safety with responsible animal management and regulatory compliance. Option A. Advise residents to leave the animal alone and depart the scene without further investigation, as it is a wild animal. Option B. Observe the animal from a safe distance, assess its behavior for signs of distress or territoriality, and consult with wildlife authorities before any intervention. Option C. Assume the animal is rabid and attempt to euthanize it on site to eliminate the perceived threat. Option D. Immediately attempt to capture the animal using standard capture equipment, prioritizing public safety over detailed behavioral observation. Correct answer is D. Immediately attempt to capture the animal using standard capture equipment, prioritizing public safety over detailed behavioral observation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an animal control officer to apply species-specific behavioral knowledge to a complex public safety situation, balancing the welfare of the animal with the safety of the community. The officer must interpret subtle behavioral cues and understand the underlying motivations of the animal to determine the most appropriate and lawful course of action. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, evidence-based assessment of the animal's behavior and the specific environmental context. This aligns with the principles of responsible animal management, which emphasize understanding animal welfare needs and employing humane, effective control methods. By considering the species-specific behaviors of wildlife, particularly a potentially stressed or cornered animal, the officer can de-escalate the situation, minimize risk to both the public and the animal, and ensure compliance with relevant animal welfare legislation and local council bylaws that govern the management of native fauna. This approach also supports the ethical imperative to avoid unnecessary harm or distress to wildlife. An incorrect approach that relies solely on immediate apprehension without considering the animal's species-specific stress signals or territorial instincts would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to unnecessary aggression from the animal, potential injury to the officer or the public, and significant distress to the animal, violating animal welfare principles and potentially contravening sections of the Animal Welfare Act that mandate humane treatment. Another incorrect approach, such as assuming the animal is inherently dangerous without observing its behavior, could lead to an overreaction, such as the use of excessive force or unnecessary euthanasia, which would be ethically and regulatorily unsound. Failing to consult with wildlife experts or relevant authorities when dealing with native species represents a failure to adhere to best practice guidelines and potentially breaches specific provisions within the wildlife management regulations that mandate expert consultation for certain species or situations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive risk assessment, considering the immediate threat to public safety. This should be followed by an objective observation of the animal's behavior, interpreting these observations through the lens of species-specific ethology. Consultation with subject matter experts, e.g., wildlife biologists, experienced animal behaviorists, should be sought when dealing with unfamiliar or potentially dangerous species. Finally, all actions taken must be justifiable under the relevant legislative framework, prioritizing humane outcomes and minimizing harm. Question 11. The audit findings indicate a recurring pattern of public reports concerning unusual behavior and visible signs of illness in a specific species of wild animal within a residential area. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for an animal control officer to take in response to these reports, considering the potential for disease transmission? Option A. Immediately attempt to capture and relocate all observed animals to a remote wildlife sanctuary to prevent further public exposure. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive risk assessment involving consultation with veterinary and wildlife authorities to determine the nature of the illness and potential public health implications before any direct intervention. Option C. Proceed with the humane euthanasia of all observed animals to eliminate any potential disease threat to the community. Option D. Advise the public to avoid contact with the animals and await further reports, as the animals are wild and not a direct responsibility. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive risk assessment involving consultation with veterinary and wildlife authorities to determine the nature of the illness and potential public health implications before any direct intervention. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an animal control officer to balance immediate public safety concerns with the welfare of potentially infected wild animals. The officer must make a rapid assessment of risk based on limited information, considering both the potential for disease transmission to humans and other domestic animals, and the legal and ethical obligations regarding wildlife management. The audit findings highlight a systemic issue, demanding a proactive and informed response rather than a reactive one. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes public health and safety while adhering to relevant legislation and best practices for animal disease management. This includes consulting with veterinary professionals and wildlife authorities to determine the most appropriate course of action, which may involve containment, testing, or humane euthanasia depending on the disease and species. This aligns with the principles of responsible animal control, which mandate protecting the community from zoonotic diseases and ensuring the humane treatment of animals, all within the bounds of the Diploma of Animal Control and Management curriculum and applicable Australian regulations concerning biosecurity and animal welfare. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately attempt to capture and relocate the animals without proper assessment. This could lead to the spread of disease to new areas, potentially exposing more people and animals, and may violate biosecurity regulations. It also fails to consider the potential suffering of the animals if they are moved to an unsuitable environment or are already severely ill. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the report due to the animals being wild. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Animal control officers have a duty to investigate potential public health risks, regardless of whether the animals are domestic or wild. Ignoring such reports could lead to an outbreak of a zoonotic disease, with severe consequences for public health and the environment, contravening the core responsibilities of animal control. A third incorrect approach would be to immediately euthanize the animals without veterinary consultation or confirmation of a dangerous disease. This is ethically problematic and potentially illegal, as it constitutes unnecessary destruction of animal life and bypasses established protocols for disease investigation and management. It also fails to gather crucial data that could inform future prevention strategies. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic risk assessment framework. This involves 1. Information gathering. Collect all available details about the sighting, including species, behavior, and location. 2. Initial risk evaluation. Assess the immediate threat to public health and safety based on known zoonotic diseases associated with the species. 3. Consultation. Contact relevant authorities, e.g., local public health department, wildlife veterinarians, biosecurity agencies, for expert advice and guidance. 4. Action planning. Develop a plan that balances risk mitigation, animal welfare, and legal compliance. 5. Documentation. Record all actions taken, observations, and communications. This structured approach ensures that decisions are evidence-based, legally sound, and ethically defensible. Question 12. Regulatory review indicates that a stray dog has been impounded. The animal appears healthy but is of unknown vaccination history. The shelter is experiencing a high intake rate, and there is pressure to rehome animals quickly to free up space. Considering the relevant Australian animal control legislation and public health guidelines, what is the most appropriate course of action regarding vaccination for this impounded dog prior to potential rehoming? Option A. Only vaccinate the dog if it shows signs of illness, as administering vaccines to a healthy animal of unknown history might be unnecessary. Option B. Administer the core vaccines recommended by the Australian Veterinary Association for dogs, following the standard schedule for a dog of unknown vaccination status, and consult with a veterinarian if any concerns arise regarding the dog's health. Option C. Delay all vaccinations until a suitable adopter is identified, at which point the adopter can be advised on the vaccination requirements. Option D. Administer a single, broad-spectrum vaccine immediately, without further veterinary consultation, to provide some level of protection. The correct answer is B. Administer the core vaccines recommended by the Australian Veterinary Association for dogs, following the standard schedule for a dog of unknown vaccination status, and consult with a veterinarian if any concerns arise regarding the dog's health. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in animal control, balancing the immediate needs of an animal with the long-term health implications and regulatory requirements for vaccination. The professional challenge lies in interpreting and applying the relevant Australian state or territory legislation regarding animal health and disease prevention, specifically concerning vaccination protocols for impounded animals, while also considering the welfare of the individual animal. The urgency of reharming conflicts with the need for adequate disease protection, requiring a nuanced decision based on established guidelines and best practices. Correct approach analysis. Adhering to the established vaccination schedule recommended by the relevant Australian Veterinary Association and mandated by local council bylaws or state/territory legislation for impounded animals represents best professional practice. This approach ensures that the animal receives appropriate protection against common and potentially zoonotic diseases, safeguarding both the animal's health and the health of potential adopters and the wider community. It aligns with the ethical duty of care for impounded animals and the regulatory obligation to prevent the spread of disease. This practice is grounded in the principles of public health and animal welfare as enshrined in Australian animal control legislation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a wait-and-see approach to vaccination, delaying it until an adopter is found, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This disregards the incubation periods of common diseases and exposes the animal to unnecessary risk while in the shelter environment, potentially leading to illness and suffering. It also poses a risk to other animals in the facility and to potential adopters. This approach fails to meet the duty of care and contravenes the spirit and letter of animal health regulations designed to prevent disease transmission. Administering a single, broad-spectrum vaccine without considering the animal's age, health status, or the specific disease risks prevalent in the local area is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of species-specific vaccination needs and can lead to inadequate protection or adverse reactions. It fails to adhere to the principle of evidence-based veterinary care and may not meet the minimum requirements stipulated by animal control legislation, which often implicitly or explicitly requires appropriate disease prevention measures. Failing to consult with a veterinarian or qualified animal health professional regarding the appropriate vaccination protocol for an impounded animal is a critical error. This bypasses expert advice essential for determining the correct vaccines, timing, and any necessary contraindications, leading to potentially suboptimal or harmful health outcomes for the animal. This constitutes a failure to uphold professional standards and a potential breach of duty of care, as animal control officers are expected to operate within the scope of their expertise and seek professional guidance when necessary, as often implied by the regulatory framework governing their practice. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process that prioritizes animal welfare and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legislative requirements and council bylaws pertaining to impounded animal health and vaccination in their jurisdiction. 2. Consulting with a veterinarian or qualified animal health professional to determine the most appropriate vaccination protocol based on the animal's age, health, and local disease prevalence. 3. Implementing the recommended vaccination schedule promptly upon intake, unless medically contraindicated, in which case a veterinary assessment and plan are crucial. 4. Documenting all vaccination procedures and veterinary advice thoroughly. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and legally sound, promoting the best possible outcomes for the animal and the community. Question 13. The efficiency study reveals that current staffing levels in the animal holding facilities are higher than comparable organizations, suggesting potential cost savings. However, the study also notes that these staffing levels directly correlate with the provision of enhanced enrichment activities and more frequent individual animal assessments, which contribute to lower stress levels and fewer behavioral issues among the animals. Considering the Animal Welfare Act 2006 and its emphasis on the 5 freedoms, which of the following approaches best balances the need for operational efficiency with the legal and ethical obligations towards animal welfare? Option A. Implement a tiered system for animal assessments, reducing the frequency for animals deemed low risk to free up staff time, while increasing the focus on proactive behavioral management strategies. Option B. Reduce staffing in animal holding areas to match the benchmark, reallocating savings to other operational priorities, and implementing a system where staff report any observed welfare concerns during their reduced interaction time. Option C. Invest in advanced monitoring technology that can remotely track animal behavior and welfare indicators, allowing for a reduction in direct staff observation and thus enabling staffing level adjustments. Option D. Maintain current staffing levels in animal holding areas, focusing on identifying non-staff-related efficiencies such as optimizing resource procurement and streamlining administrative processes to achieve cost savings without compromising direct animal care. The correct answer is B. Reduce staffing in animal holding areas to match the benchmark, reallocating savings to other operational priorities, and implementing a system where staff report any observed welfare concerns during their reduced interaction time. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between resource limitations and the legal and ethical obligations to ensure animal welfare. Animal control officers often operate with finite budgets and staffing, yet are mandated by legislation to uphold specific standards of care and investigate potential breaches. The pressure to achieve efficiency through potentially compromising welfare standards requires careful judgment to ensure that operational improvements do not inadvertently lead to regulatory noncompliance or ethical breaches. Balancing immediate operational demands with long-term animal well-being and legal adherence is a core difficulty. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes adherence to the Animal Welfare Act 2006, UK, and relevant codes of practice. This legislation sets the minimum standards for animal welfare, including the 5 freedoms: freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, or disease, freedom to express normal behavior, freedom from fear and distress. Any proposed efficiency measure must be evaluated against these legal requirements and ethical considerations. Best professional practice dictates that efficiency gains should be sought through improved processes, training, or technology that do not compromise the welfare of animals under the care of the organization or those they are tasked with protecting. This ensures legal compliance, upholds ethical responsibilities, and maintains public trust. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves reducing staffing levels in animal care areas to cut costs, even if it means animals receive less individual attention or monitoring. This directly contravenes the duty of care mandated by the Animal Welfare Act 2006, which requires that animals are provided with adequate supervision and care to prevent suffering. Ethically, it fails to uphold the responsibility to ensure animals can express normal behavior and are free from fear and distress due to lack of human interaction or inadequate management. Another incorrect approach is to implement a blanket policy of reducing the frequency of veterinary checks for minor ailments, relying solely on staff observation. Staff observation is crucial. The Animal Welfare Act 2006 mandates that animals receive prompt and appropriate veterinary attention when they are, or appear to be, suffering. This approach risks delaying necessary treatment, leading to prolonged pain or suffering, which is a clear breach of the Act and a significant ethical failure. A further incorrect approach might be to reallocate resources from enrichment programs to other operational areas, arguing that enrichment is not a direct legal mandate. However, the freedom to express normal behavior is a fundamental component of the Animal Welfare Act 2006 and is often interpreted to include the provision of suitable environments and opportunities for natural behaviors. Neglecting enrichment can lead to behavioral problems, stress, and a decline in overall welfare, constituting a regulatory and ethical failing. Professional reasoning. Professionals in animal control management must adopt a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant legislation, in this case, the Animal Welfare Act 2006 and associated guidance. When faced with efficiency pressures, the primary filter for any proposed change must be its impact on animal welfare and legal compliance. A structured approach involves 1. Identifying the proposed efficiency measure. 2. Assessing its potential impact against the legal requirements of the Animal Welfare Act 2006 and any relevant codes of practice. 3. Considering the ethical implications, particularly the 5 freedoms. 4. Exploring alternative methods of achieving efficiency that do not compromise welfare, such as process optimization, staff training, or technological adoption. 5. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind any changes implemented. This ensures accountability and a commitment to the highest standards of animal welfare. Question 14. The audit findings indicate a pattern of inconsistent application of impoundment procedures following reports of alleged neglect. In a recent case, an officer responded to a complaint about a dog appearing underweight and lethargic in a backyard. The owner was present but appeared uncooperative and dismissive of the officer's concerns. The officer, feeling pressured by the owner's attitude and the perceived urgency of the situation, immediately removed the dog and placed it in the local shelter without completing the full impoundment documentation or obtaining a veterinary assessment prior to seizure, citing the need for immediate intervention. What is the most appropriate course of action for the animal control officer in this scenario, considering the Diploma of Animal Control and Management Regulatory Framework? Option A. Proceed with the impoundment as per standard protocol, ensuring all required documentation is completed accurately and promptly, and arrange for an immediate veterinary assessment to determine the animal's condition and welfare needs. Option B. Seize the animal immediately and place it in the shelter, prioritizing immediate removal over detailed documentation, as the owner's uncooperativeness suggests potential ongoing issues. Option C. Contact the owner's neighbors to gather further anecdotal evidence of neglect before making a decision on impoundment to ensure a strong case. Option D. Release the animal back to the owner with a warning, advising them to seek veterinary attention and schedule a follow-up visit to monitor the situation. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the impoundment as per standard protocol, ensuring all required documentation is completed accurately and promptly, and arrange for an immediate veterinary assessment to determine the animal's condition and welfare needs. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between immediate public safety concerns and the established legal and ethical obligations towards animal welfare. Animal control officers are tasked with enforcing regulations, which often involves difficult decisions that impact both humans and animals. The pressure to resolve a situation quickly, coupled with the emotional distress it can cause, requires a systematic and ethically grounded decision-making process. The correct approach prioritizes adherence to the relevant legislation and established protocols for animal seizure and impoundment. This ensures that actions taken are legally defensible, consistent with the principles of natural justice for the animal owner, and aligned with the welfare standards mandated by the Diploma of Animal Control and Management curriculum. It demonstrates a commitment to due process, which is a cornerstone of responsible animal control operations. By following established procedures, the officer upholds the integrity of the animal control system and protects the organization from potential legal repercussions. An incorrect approach that involves immediate seizure without proper documentation or investigation fails to uphold the principles of due process and may violate the owner's rights. This could lead to legal challenges and damage the reputation of the Animal Control Service. Another incorrect approach, which involves ignoring the potential welfare concerns due to a perceived minor infraction or a desire to avoid conflict, represents a failure to act in accordance with the officer's duty of care and the legislative mandate to protect animals from suffering. This could result in the animal's condition deteriorating, leading to greater suffering and potential legal liability for negligence. A third incorrect approach, which involves making a decision based solely on public pressure or personal opinion rather than objective evidence and regulatory requirements, undermines the professional standards of animal control. This demonstrates a lack of impartiality and a failure to apply the law consistently. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant legislation and organizational policies. This involves gathering all available facts objectively, assessing the situation against established criteria, consulting with supervisors or legal counsel if necessary, and documenting all actions and decisions meticulously. Ethical considerations, such as the welfare of the animal and the rights of the owner, must be weighed within the legal framework. Question 15. Implementation of a comprehensive risk assessment protocol for an agitated dog exhibiting growling and lunging at its enclosure fence prior to any direct intervention is crucial for ensuring the safety of the animal control officer and the public. Which of the following actions best exemplifies this risk assessment approach? Option A. Leaving the scene without further observation, deeming the situation too unpredictable to manage safely. Option B. Observing the dog's body language, vocalizations, and environmental triggers from a safe distance to gauge its level of stress and potential for aggression. Option C. Immediately attempting to physically restrain the dog using a catch pole, assuming it is inherently aggressive due to its breed. Option D. Approaching the enclosure directly and speaking loudly to the dog in an attempt to calm it down. Correct answer is B. Observing the dog's body language, vocalizations, and environmental triggers from a safe distance to gauge its level of stress and potential for aggression. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an animal control officer to assess a potentially dangerous situation involving an animal exhibiting unpredictable behavior. The officer must balance the need to safely manage the animal with the potential risks to themselves, the public, and the animal itself. A failure to accurately assess the animal's behavior and implement appropriate risk mitigation strategies could lead to injury, property damage, or the unnecessary euthanasia of the animal. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic risk assessment process that prioritizes safety and evidence-based decision-making. This aligns with the principles of responsible animal management and the duty of care expected of animal control professionals. By observing the animal's body language, environmental factors, and potential triggers, the officer can make an informed judgment about the level of threat and the most appropriate course of action. This approach is ethically sound, as it seeks to minimize harm and distress to all parties involved, and it is procedurally correct, as it follows a logical and defensible decision-making process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately attempting to capture the animal without prior observation. This disregards the fundamental principles of animal behavior assessment and significantly increases the risk of a negative outcome. Ethically, it is irresponsible to proceed without understanding the animal's state, potentially provoking an aggressive response. Legally, it could lead to charges if the officer's actions cause harm due to negligence. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on assumptions based on the animal's breed or species. A breed can offer some general behavioral tendencies. Individual temperament and situational context are far more critical. This approach is a failure of professional judgment and can lead to misclassification of risk, potentially resulting in either an overly aggressive intervention or a failure to adequately protect the public from a genuinely dangerous animal. It violates the ethical obligation to treat each animal as an individual. A third incorrect approach is to withdraw from the situation entirely without any attempt to assess or manage the risk. While safety is paramount, abandoning a situation where an animal may pose a risk to the public or itself is a dereliction of duty. Animal control officers have a responsibility to respond, and at a minimum, attempt to gather information to inform further action or alert other relevant authorities. This failure to act can have serious legal and ethical ramifications if harm occurs as a result of inaction. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first establishing a safe distance and observing the animal's behavior, noting its posture, vocalizations, and interaction with its environment. This observation phase informs the risk assessment. Based on the assessment, the officer should then select the least invasive but most effective intervention strategy, always prioritizing safety. If the situation escalates or the officer feels unsafe, they should seek backup or consult with supervisors. This systematic, observational, and adaptive approach ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and legally defensible. Question 16. Operational review demonstrates that an animal control officer is tasked with safely relocating a stray dog that appears fearful and is exhibiting signs of anxiety, such as panting and a tucked tail. Which of the following approaches best minimizes stress during handling, adhering to Australian animal welfare regulations? Option A. Immediately attempting to corner the dog and apply a slip lead with firm pressure to prevent escape and ensure quick control. Option B. Allowing the dog to approach the handler at its own pace, using a calm and reassuring tone of voice, and offering a high-value treat to build trust before attempting to leash it. Option C. Using loud noises and sudden movements to startle the dog into a more compliant state for easier capture. Option D. Placing the dog directly into a transport cage, without any prior interaction or acclimatization, to reduce the risk of it biting. The correct answer is B. Allowing the dog to approach the handler at its own pace, using a calm and reassuring tone of voice, and offering a high-value treat to build trust before attempting to leash it. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because animal control officers frequently encounter animals in stressful situations, requiring them to balance the need for effective handling with the animal's welfare. The core of the challenge lies in recognizing subtle signs of stress and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies that align with regulatory requirements and ethical best practices for animal welfare. Careful judgment is required to select handling techniques that are both efficient for the officer and minimize distress for the animal, thereby preventing potential injury to both. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a gradual, low-stress introduction to handling, utilizing positive reinforcement and environmental control. This aligns with the principles of animal welfare as outlined in relevant Australian legislation, such as the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act (POCTA) in Victoria, which mandates that animals must be treated humanely and that unnecessary pain or suffering must be avoided. By employing techniques like allowing the animal to approach voluntarily, using calm vocalizations, and providing a familiar scent, the officer is actively minimizing the animal's fear and anxiety. This proactive approach not only adheres to legal obligations, but also fosters trust, making future interactions safer and more manageable. An incorrect approach that involves immediate restraint and forceful handling fails to acknowledge the animal's distress signals. This would be a direct contravention of the duty of care owed to the animal under animal welfare legislation, potentially constituting cruelty by causing unnecessary suffering. Forcing an animal into a situation it perceives as threatening can lead to defensive aggression, increasing the risk of injury to both the animal and the handler, and can create long-term behavioral issues. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on loud noises or sudden movements to gain compliance, demonstrates a disregard for the animal's sensory experience and emotional state. This is ethically unacceptable and legally problematic, as it can induce extreme fear and panic, leading to severe stress and potential physical harm. Such methods are not only inhumane but also counterproductive, as a highly stressed animal is less likely to be safely and effectively managed. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic assessment of the animal's species, temperament, and the immediate environment. Officers should be trained to recognize a range of stress indicators, from subtle ear twitches and lip licking to more overt signs like panting, vocalization, or attempts to escape. The decision-making framework should prioritize de-escalation, employing the least invasive methods first. This involves considering the use of environmental modifications, positive reinforcement, and gradual acclimatization before resorting to any form of physical restraint. If restraint is necessary, it should be applied with minimal force and duration, always prioritizing the animal's welfare and safety. Continuous reassessment of the animal's stress levels throughout the handling process is crucial, with a willingness to adapt the approach as needed. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that in situations involving suspected severe animal cruelty, where criminal prosecution is a likely outcome, an animal control officer discovers a distressed animal in a location that may contain critical evidence. What is the most appropriate initial course of action to ensure both animal welfare and the integrity of a potential criminal investigation? Option A. Attempt to gather all evidence and conduct a preliminary interview with any present individuals independently before contacting law enforcement. Option B. Wait for law enforcement to arrive and conduct their full investigation before any intervention with the animal occurs, regardless of the animal's immediate welfare. Option C. Immediately contact the designated law enforcement agency to report the situation and request their guidance and presence, while ensuring the animal's immediate safety without disturbing potential evidence. Option D. Proceed with removing the animal to a safe location and documenting its condition, assuming that law enforcement will be notified later. The correct answer is C. Immediately contact the designated law enforcement agency to report the situation and request their guidance and presence, while ensuring the animal's immediate safety without disturbing potential evidence. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an animal control officer to navigate the complex interdependencies between animal welfare legislation, public safety mandates, and the operational realities of law enforcement agencies. The officer must balance immediate animal welfare concerns with the need for evidence preservation and the legal requirements of a criminal investigation, all while respecting the distinct roles and jurisdictions of collaborating agencies. Careful judgment is required to ensure that actions taken do not compromise the investigation or violate the rights of individuals involved. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a coordinated and legally sound response. By immediately contacting the designated law enforcement agency and adhering to their established protocols for evidence handling, the animal control officer ensures that the investigation is not jeopardized. This aligns with the principles of interagency cooperation mandated by various animal control and management regulations, which often stipulate clear lines of communication and mutual support. Furthermore, it upholds the ethical obligation to act in a manner that is both compassionate towards the animal and respectful of the legal process, ensuring that any intervention is conducted with due diligence and appropriate authority. An incorrect approach that involves immediately removing the animal without consulting law enforcement fails to acknowledge the potential evidentiary value of the animal's condition and surroundings. This could lead to the loss of crucial evidence, thereby hindering the investigation and potentially allowing an offender to evade prosecution. Such an action would violate the spirit, if not the letter, of laws that require cooperation between agencies and may also contravene specific protocols for handling evidence in animal cruelty cases. Another incorrect approach, which is to delay intervention until law enforcement has completed their entire process, could result in the further suffering or death of the animal. This would be a significant ethical failure and a breach of the animal control officer's primary duty to ensure animal welfare. It also demonstrates a lack of understanding of the urgency often required in animal welfare emergencies and a failure to effectively advocate for the animal's immediate needs within the collaborative framework. A third incorrect approach, which is to attempt to conduct the investigation independently without involving law enforcement, oversteps the animal control officer's authority and expertise in criminal matters. This could lead to procedural errors, compromised evidence, and legal challenges, undermining the credibility of both the animal control agency and the law enforcement investigation. It ignores the established legal framework that designates law enforcement as the primary authority for criminal investigations. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of one's own agency's mandate and limitations, as well as a thorough knowledge of the roles and responsibilities of collaborating agencies. When a situation involves potential criminal activity, the immediate priority should be to establish contact with the appropriate law enforcement body. This should be followed by a collaborative assessment of the situation, ensuring that all actions taken are in accordance with legal requirements and best practices for both animal welfare and evidence preservation. Maintaining open communication and respecting the established chain of command and jurisdictional boundaries are paramount to achieving a successful and legally sound outcome. Question 18. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to refine our procedures for responding to animal-related incidents, particularly when an animal is observed in a public park exhibiting signs of distress and potentially aggressive behavior towards passersby. Considering the Diploma of Animal Control and Management's regulatory framework, which of the following approaches best optimizes the response process? Option A. Assess the situation from a safe distance. Attempt to contain the animal using available resources and call for specialized assistance if required, while monitoring its behavior. Option B. Contact a veterinarian immediately to discuss euthanasia options without attempting any assessment or capture. Option C. Immediately attempt to corner and capture the animal using forceful methods to secure it quickly. Option D. Advise the public to avoid the area and wait for the animal to leave on its own, without direct intervention. The correct answer is C. Immediately attempt to corner and capture the animal using forceful methods to secure it quickly. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate public safety with the welfare of an animal, while also adhering to specific legislative requirements and departmental protocols. The presence of a potentially aggressive animal in a public space necessitates a swift but controlled response to prevent harm to humans and the animal itself. The challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate intervention method that is both effective and legally compliant, considering the limited information available initially. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes de-escalation and assessment before resorting to more forceful measures. This aligns with the principles of responsible animal management, which emphasize minimizing harm and using the least intrusive method necessary. By attempting to contain and assess the animal's behavior and condition, officers can make an informed decision about the next steps, which may include capture, relocation, or, if absolutely necessary and legally justified, euthanasia. This methodical approach ensures compliance with animal welfare legislation, which typically mandates that animals be treated humanely and that lethal force is a last resort. It also reflects best practice in incident management, focusing on information gathering and risk assessment to achieve the best possible outcome for all involved. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately attempting to capture the animal using aggressive tactics without prior assessment. This could escalate the animal's fear and aggression, increasing the risk of injury to both the animal and the responding officer, and potentially causing distress to the animal that is disproportionate to the threat. This fails to uphold animal welfare standards and could lead to a breach of duty of care. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the incident due to perceived low risk, assuming the animal will move on. This neglects the duty of care to public safety and animal welfare. The animal could pose a significant risk later, or it may be injured or in distress, requiring intervention. This failure to act promptly can have serious legal and ethical repercussions. A third incorrect approach is to immediately contact a veterinarian for euthanasia without attempting any form of assessment or capture. This bypasses the standard procedure for managing animal incidents and assumes euthanasia is the only viable solution without exploring other options. This is ethically questionable and may not be legally permissible under animal control legislation, which typically requires a clear justification for euthanasia, such as irremediable suffering or an unmanageable public safety threat. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with immediate risk assessment and scene safety. This is followed by information gathering, including observing the animal's behavior, species, and environment. Based on this assessment, officers should determine the most appropriate intervention strategy, prioritizing humane methods and de-escalation. This process must be guided by relevant legislation, departmental policies, and ethical considerations, ensuring that actions are justifiable, proportionate, and aimed at achieving the best outcome for public safety and animal welfare. Question 19. Investigation of the most effective shelter design and layout considerations for a new regional animal management facility in New South Wales, Australia, requires a comparative analysis of several proposed approaches. Which approach best balances animal welfare, operational efficiency, and regulatory compliance? Option A. A layout that prioritizes maximizing the number of individual kennels and enclosures to accommodate the highest possible intake of stray and surrendered animals, with minimal emphasis on enrichment or specialized housing features. Option B. A design that focuses on cost-effectiveness by utilizing basic, multi-purpose enclosures with minimal ventilation and lighting, and consolidating all animal holding areas into a single, large open-plan space to reduce construction expenses. Option C. A design that incorporates species-specific housing modules with ample natural light, robust ventilation systems, sound-dampening materials, secure outdoor exercise areas, and dedicated zones for quarantine, veterinary care, and public interaction, while ensuring clear separation of different animal populations to prevent disease transmission. Option D. A plan that emphasizes a highly centralized intake and processing area with limited segregation of incoming animals, relying on basic cleaning protocols and minimal dedicated spaces for veterinary assessment or isolation. The correct answer is C. A design that incorporates species-specific housing modules with ample natural light, robust ventilation systems, sound-dampening materials, secure outdoor exercise areas, and dedicated zones for quarantine, veterinary care, and public interaction, while ensuring clear separation of different animal populations to prevent disease transmission. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of animal welfare with long-term operational efficiency and compliance with specific Australian regulatory frameworks governing animal shelters. The decision-maker must consider not only the physical space, but also the psychological well-being of the animals, the safety of staff and the public, and the adherence to guidelines that promote humane treatment and disease prevention. Careful judgment is required to select a design that is both functional and ethically sound. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a multifaceted design that addresses the complex needs of shelter animals and operations. This includes considerations for species-specific housing, adequate ventilation, natural light, noise reduction, and secure containment, all of which are implicitly or explicitly supported by Australian animal welfare legislation and industry best practices. Such a design minimizes stress, reduces the risk of disease transmission, and enhances adaptability, aligning with the ethical imperative to provide a high standard of care. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing the number of animals housed without adequate consideration for their welfare fails to meet the ethical and legal obligations under Australian animal welfare laws. This can lead to increased stress, aggression, and disease, contravening the duty of care. Another incorrect approach that neglects essential biosecurity measures, such as proper separation of species or inadequate cleaning protocols, poses a significant risk of disease outbreaks, which is a direct violation of public health and animal welfare regulations. An approach that overlooks staff safety and efficient workflow can lead to injuries and operational inefficiency, indirectly impacting animal care and potentially contravening workplace health and safety legislation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant Australian legislation, e.g., state-based animal welfare acts, local council bylaws, and industry guidelines. This should be followed by a needs assessment that considers the types and numbers of animals to be housed, their specific behavioral and physiological requirements, and the operational needs of the facility. A comparative analysis of different design options, evaluating each against these criteria, ethical principles, and regulatory compliance, will lead to the most appropriate and responsible outcome. Question 20. What factors determine the most appropriate and legally compliant restraint technique for a distressed native Australian marsupial encountered in a suburban environment? Option A. The availability of common household items that can be quickly repurposed for restraint without specific consideration for the animal's welfare or species. Option B. The species of marsupial, its observed level of distress and aggression, the surrounding environment, and the availability of appropriate personal protective equipment and capture devices. Option C. The officer's personal experience with handling similar animals and their preferred method of restraint, regardless of the specific animal's condition. Option D. The perceived urgency of the situation, prioritizing immediate containment over the animal's comfort and potential for injury. The correct answer is B. The species of marsupial, its observed level of distress and aggression, the surrounding environment, and the availability of appropriate personal protective equipment and capture devices. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because animal control officers must balance the immediate need for safe and effective restraint with the animal's welfare and the officer's safety. Wildlife, in particular, presents unique challenges due to their unpredictable nature, potential for disease transmission, and the legal protections they may have under relevant legislation. The decision-making process requires a thorough understanding of animal behavior, species-specific restraint needs, and the legal framework governing animal management. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a risk assessment that considers the species, individual animal's temperament, the environment, and the available resources. This aligns with the principles of humane handling and the legal duty of care owed to animals under the relevant Australian animal welfare legislation, such as the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act (POCTA) in various Australian states, and the specific guidelines for animal control officers. It ensures that restraint methods are appropriate, minimizing stress and injury to the animal while maximizing officer safety. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the officer's personal preference or experience without considering the specific animal or situation is a regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to unnecessary suffering or injury to the animal, violating the duty of care. Another incorrect approach that ignores the potential for zoonotic diseases or the need for specialized equipment when dealing with wildlife demonstrates a failure to adhere to public health guidelines and safe work practices, potentially endangering the officer and the public. Furthermore, using excessive force or a method that is known to cause significant distress without justification would be a direct contravention of animal cruelty provisions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with observation and assessment of the animal and its surroundings. This should be followed by consulting relevant species-specific handling guides and legal requirements. The officer must then select the most appropriate restraint technique that is safe for both the animal and themselves, considering the least invasive method that achieves the objective. Continuous reassessment of the situation and the animal's response is crucial throughout the restraint process.